We're now on the top of Daf Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Miktsiv u paratzu. Does it have a vav hachibur? Paratzu ksiv. The pasuk in Hosea omits a vav to separate paratzu and isolate it as a separate avera that in and of itself it's sufficient to bring such an onish chamer, which is worse than dara mabel. And that's the avera of creating mamzerus, as a result of the psak that he offered in getting a Kiddushin without being a baki in the halachas. Now we get back to the drawing board. We were mentioning and enumerating different halachas that the Talmidim heard from their Rebbe Ravasi, who is no longer alive. Hadar Yasvei v'Kamer Odesnan. When it says in the Mishnah in the second chapter in Kinim, Ha'isha, Kinim is about Yoledes, and she has to bring a seli ola and a tar oyona lechatos. Hevia eschatos. She brought the carbon chatos, but she hasn't yet brought the carbon ola, the seli ola, umesa, and she died. Do the Yarshim pick up the tab and have to pay for the mother's his chayvus through birth to bring a carbon ola? Yaviu Yarshim. The Yarshim achayev to bring the carbon olosa. V'yomer Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel v'hu shefrishasto michayim, because she was mafreshet during her lifetime. Aval lo efrishasa michayim lo. The Yarshim don't have to be mafresh on behalf of their deceased mother and ola, that she herself, the mother, during her lifetime, was obligated to bring that olah. But that's only a shibud haguf. The shibud nechasim does not set in. Almo kasava shibud alav doraisa. That even though we say that the nechasim of a person are mishubadim, that lean the L-I-E-N to pay up their chovos, that's not a doraisa halacha. That's only a derabanan halacha. And therefore, we will not collect from the Yarshim the shibud, which is only the Rabbanan. Amar of Asi, Amar of Yochanan, Af al gav de lo efrisha mechayim. The Oledes has to bring this ola. I'm saying the Yarshim have to bring the ola of the Oledes, even if she didn't get a chance during her lifetime to be mafresh the ola. Alma kasavar. Shibuda havidoraisa. And that means that a person who incurs an obligation to pay money, what's the word I'm looking for? A debt. The debt is chal in the gufa karka, with a shibud in the gufa karka. And this in the language of Chazal is nechasim shel adam arevim l'tashlum chovasa. So it comes out that Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan are debating whether nichsei adam mishubadim l'chovasa min Torah or only min Rabbanan. Frek the Gemara, okay, fine, but that's an old machlokas. We know about this in the case of milva. There are Rabbi Shmuel the Amri Chavayu, milva balpeh ein a gova min a Yarshim. If a person borrowed money from Ruvain and then he died, Ruvain does not have any recourse to collect up the milva balpeh, the chov, from the son of Ruvain. V'lomen al lekuchos. And how much more so, it goes without saying that if there were lekuchos who purchased from the lova after the alva, the din Torah is that you don't collect from the Yarshim or the lekuchos unless it's a milva ksuv b'shtar, unless the document testifies to the effect that there was such a debt. And since we're dealing now with a milva balpeh, there's no document, there's no kol, there's no betichus, therefore you cannot collect it from the mishubadim, from the lekuchos. For Rabbi Yochanan, for Reish Lakish Tamri Chavai, milva balpeh gova bein min yoshim, bein min alakuchos. It means that whatever nechasim are in her possession, and they were there at the time of the alva, they become a raven. They become guarantors, and there's a shibud min Torah to pay up their mother or father's chov. So the Gemara's kasha is, since we have an old machlokes here about whether milva peh is govui min alakuchas or not, so why did he have to teach me the din, even with regard to Afrashas Karbonos? We know that whether Shibuda Doraisa or Shibuda Dorabanan, that's the issue. Tzricha. We have a Chiddush here. Tiyet Marbaha, if we only had Machlokas in the case of a Milval Peh, we would make a mistake and think, V'hachka Omar Shmuel, with regard to a Milva Balpeh, Shmuel says, Ein Chosev Mishtabdim Lalvasa Mishum Delo Milva Ksuva Batori. So that means it's a Milva Balpeh, because it's not written explicitly in the Torah, and there's no Chov here in the Torah. But in the case of Yoledes, where the Torah imposed upon him an obligation to bring karbanos, I would have thought Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, that since it's a milva aksuva batorah, therefore it's more chomer than a milva b'shtar. The yashmina b'hach, and if you only told me the machlokus in that case, meaning in the din of Yoledes, then I would make a mistake and say only b'chaka amar Rabbi Yochanan that nechasim shel adam ishtabdim lechovas karbanos the milvaksu b'torah kiksu b'shtar davi. All this is written in the Torah, and therefore the nechasim are mishubadim for the chov. Aval hach b'hach, in the case of milv balpeh, ema modulei l'shmuel tzricha. I might think that we should be accepting of Rabbi Yochanan and ein anachasim b'shtabdim is tzricha. Therefore, we need this machlokas in both cases to teach me that both cases there is machlokas. Amar pap hilchus amil valpeh gov min hayorshim v'eina gov min alakuchos. What's the difference? Gov min hayorshim shibuda doraisa. Eino gov min alakuchos the lesle kola. Even though shibuda doraisa, and you would think therefore that anyone who buys the karka that has a lien on it to pay up a chov, and it's a shibuda doraisa, he should be able to collect his chov from that guy. Is chacham or mafkia the shibud in a case of leslie kola, like a milval peh. And now we go back to the Mishnah that we started in the beginning of the Masechta, the kones atzma. How can she get free of ishus and then allow her to marry someone else? Beget umisa bal bishlem beget tichsev kosel sefer krisus v'shilchami beiso ela misa sabal minolan. Wow, the Gemara is asking, how do we know that with the death of a husband there's a heter, a halachic permission that allows her to get married? So the answer is Svaro. Who asra, who sharsa. The Baal was the one who generated an Isra al kol b'nei adam, Isra eshesish. For who sharsa, and how now he's being matir her when he dies. And this Isra was because she was in an Ishus relationship, and now Mace Poka the Ishus. So the Gemara says that this is all logic. And basically, there's no Ishus, which is a form of a kinyan, to a dead man. He doesn't have kinyanim. So the Gemara rejects this. There are arayos that are asur al adam b'isur erva through marriage to a relative, like for example, Eishes Aviv, Eishes Achi Aviv, Isha B'no, V'lo Sharilu, and the Misa of the Krovim are not matir, like for example in Eishes Aviv or Dodaso v'Kaloso, they are asuras lo even after the death of the husband. So we see clearly that the Isur is generated by the Kiddushin, and it will remain active and valid even after the death of the Mekadesh. And therefore we should say that in the case of an Isur Eishes Ish, the same logic applies. Ella, says the Gemara, I'm going to prove that Misas Habal Materes Esa Isha Linose Liacher. How do we know that Misas Habal is Mater? Nita Omar Achmana, the Torah says in Parshas Ki Teitze, Yevama Yavo She'ein Labanim Asura HaYesh Labanim Uteres. So this is in Perek Chav Hey of Sefer Dvarim. A woman dies. A woman whose husband dies. And there were no children. Asura, she's not allowed to marry anyone. I shouldn't say anyone. I mean, she does fall for Yibum. So she's only muteris to the Ache Baila, her brothers-in-law. But if her husband left her with children, then she doesn't fall for Yibum. Muteris li nasi l'chol adam. So if in the case of Yibum, Misas Habal is Materes Ishto, and she's allowed to get remarried to someone else, Hayesh Labanim Muteres. And the Gemara rejects it. For Dilma, perhaps, let's be medayik in a different way. Ein Labanim, if her husband died and he didn't leave any zera, is Asura Lialma, his wife, his Yivam is not allowed to marry anyone in the world. The Sharia Liyavam, she could only marry the Yavam. The Yesh Labanim, but in a case where the Baal left her with Banim, with Zera, L'Kuli Alma Nami Asura, everybody would agree in this case that she's Asura L'Kuli Alma, meaning she's Asura Ala Kol, and that includes the Achei Baila. Ella, says the Gemara, let's prove it. Mina Amar Achmana. The Torah says Almana L'Kohen Gadol Asura Below Taseh Ha L'Kohen Hedjot Sharia. So a Kohen Hedjot is allowed to marry an Almana. You see clearly that Misas Habal is Mater Ishus. So the Gemara rejects it. Dilma L'Kohen Gadol Belav L'Kuli Alma. Maybe we're talking about an Almana L'Kohen Gadol. She's Asura B'Isur Lav Lo Taseh. But as far as the rest of the globe, she's only Asura B'Esei. It's an Isur Esei, which is based on the pasuk because of La Sefer Kris V'Nosam B'Yodav V'Shilcha Mibeso, etc., etc. And that means that only if she was sent by her husband with a get, only then is she allowed to marry someone else. But Misha Meis Baila below Shegirsha Surli Nasa. And the Gemara answers, Hi essay, Maya Vidite. This essay that you say applies to the Almana, what's it doing over here? How can you derive the conclusion I'm going to read it again. Ech efshar lomar shahalo halot haseva kari sheyu ba bizman shebaylo yechai upako mikol makom adayin tishar asur lakol beisar aseh. How can you tell me that the Isar Ashes Ish is mutter, it's paka, and yet there still is an Isar Aseh? Mimonavsha. I de ahanya Misas Habal, if the death of the husband was effective to be mafkia, the Torah Ashes Ish, is Tishtere Legamre, she should be able to marry anyone she wants, and there's no Isar Eseh. Idolo Ahanis Ahanya Misas Habal. Sorry. Idolo Ahanya Misabal. If you're going to tell me that when it says Vishilchami Beiso Isolish Acher, it's coming to teach us that Misa Sabal is not matir and it doesn't remove the issues, is tukma b'milsa kamaisa. We should put her back on the original status, and she's a surah even after the death of Isura Harishon, meaning even after the Isa Lotas and the Chiv Misan Kares that existed at the time of her husband's life. Why would the Torah feel necessary to tell me that Almana is Asur L'Kohen Gadol B'Isa Lotas? If she's allowed to marry anyone, then it makes sense. So the Gemara says, Al-Alam. Why isn't it logical to say that Misa's Baila is a ficta mi Misa? It takes her, his wife, out of the status of an almana. With regard to the Isa that has a Chiv Misa and a Chiv Kares. V'o Kimta al Esed. So why can't it be logical that the death of the husband removes his wife, the almana, from the Isa that has a Chiv Misa? But nevertheless, it still remains an Isra Aseh, a much lighter Avera. I'll find a precedent in the case of Psula Mukdash. If you have a carbon that was Nafal Mum and it became possible for Akrav al Gabi Mizbeach, Dimei Kara, at the very beginning, before he was poda them and be motzi them to chulin, if somebody would enjoy the benefit of them for Shavaputa Isbe Me'ila, he would violate the Isa Me'ila. Va'asiri begizav avoda, and the animals of carbon would still be asur to the Baal, meaning he can't shear the wool off the back of the sheep. The impiknua me'ila lesbo. If he was poded, then there's no me'ila. There's no isa me'ila, and it's mutter to be nene from them. You could shech them, you could eat them, but gizav avoda asirid. These remain awesome. And we could say the same thing with regard to an isha who became an almana. The isa of Eishes Ish was paka, but nevertheless she remains at the level of an isa kal, an isa essay. So it comes out that even the source for the Israel Almana Kohen Gadol is being rejected. Ella says the Gemara, Mita Omar Cross, since the Pasuk says in the parasha of Pturim, Milatzeislam Elchamu, Mia Isha, Sher Eras Isha V'Lolakacha, Yelech V'Yashav L'Beiso, Pen Yamas B'Mulchama, V'Isha Acher Yikacheno, somebody else is going to marry her. We see explicitly from this pasuk that a woman who lost her husband is allowed to marry another man. It says, Isha Acher Yikachenu. Maskifla Shisha Bereder of Idi Ema Man Ish Acher. Who is this mysterious anonymous Ish Acher? Yava. Why do you assume that Ishachar means anyone's allowed to marry her? Maybe the Ishachar who's allowed to marry is Dafka, the Yavam. Omar of Ashi, stay chuvas b'dover, chada the Yavam lo ikri. Ishachar is not a proper language to describe the Yavam. And therefore, we have to assume that the meaning of this pasuk is that if her husband will die in Milchama, another man will marry her. And furthermore, I'll give you another answer. Ksiv, it says in the pasuk with regard to an Ish and his Garashim Ibayla Rishon. Vechazra v'niseis li'acher v'sneya Isha achma because lo sefer krisus v'nasa b'yada v'shalchami beisa o ki yamus Isha achma. Is iskish misa legerish. We have a hekesh in this pasuk between Misa and Gerish. It says, because of, let's say, for Krisus, V'nosan B'yoda, etc., O ki yomas ishach. So, Iskish Misa Gerish, and my Gerish in Sharia V'gomeres. Gerish is mata the Isha from a Baal. She can marry anyone else in the world. So, to Misa, Sharia Vigomeres. And now the Gemara is going to ask, how do we know that a Yavama is Niknes Bibia? Now we'll leave the Mirza Hashem for tomorrow at 7:30. Thank you so much and have a great night.